IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host, Shrikrishna Upadhyaya. And on the show today, I have two guests, Laure-Anne and Kamil. Laure-Anne and Kamil work with the United Nations Development Program with the UNDP Sustainable Finance Hub. They work as program analysts with the Sustainable Finance Hub. And today I'm going to be talking to them about the work UNDP SFH does, the role it played in G20, the consensus that the SFS enabled at the G20, the Technical Assistant Action Plan for Sustainable Financing, and so on. Before we begin, a very warm welcome to both of you. Very happy to have you on All Things Policy.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Shri.
So I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about the work that UNDP SFH does. And when I looked at your website, I found some very interesting pointers out there. You say that the challenge that you're working on is that finance is not working for people or the planet. And the answer to that is an architecture for sustainable finance based on the Sustainable Development Goals. And the target, according to you, is a 1 trillion moonshot. So very interesting. And I want to know from you as to what each of these statements mean, and if you could elaborate a little bit on them.
Thank you, Shri. Indeed. So for the audience, maybe get back to what this Shri statement means. So the baseline assessment that we have at UNDP Sustainable Finance Hub is that the finance is indeed not working for people or the planet. So if you put it in a different way, it means that the financial system that we have right now cannot really support sustainable development and address all the social and environmental goals and objectives that we have right now. Meaning most of it is prioritizing some short-term gains instead of long-term benefits, and then also not helping, for example, providing enough money to some very important challenges, such as getting people out of poverty. So this is the main challenge. And interestingly enough, the issue is not that we are lacking funds. There is a lot of money out there. The world has around 450 trillion in assets, and less than 10% of it would be enough to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that have been set by the United Nations. So we do have money, but the thing is, how is the money is allocated? Where is it going and flowing? And that's a real challenge. And to be able to fix this, we think that we need a financial architecture that aligns better with the Sustainable Development Goals. And based on this, UNDP set this 1 trillion moonshot, which embodies the ambition of UNDP to promote and accelerate this switch of the financial system towards Sustainable Development Goals. So the objective is to have this 1 trillion investment in public expenditure and private capital towards the SDGs by 2025. And
Right.
yeah.
No, so when you say that the financial system is not working, so what financial system are you referring to here? Are you talking about the international financial system, the IMF, World Bank, the regime that we have today, or you're also talking about domestic financial systems?
I think you have the three levels. You have the country level, the regional level, and the international level, both interplaying and working together. At country level, you sometimes have incentives that are not well directed. For example, some countries are still financing a lot of fossil fuels through taxes, reductions, or direct subsidies. So that's the country level. Then you have a regional level in which sometimes the regulations are not aligned. So, for example, you would have some definition on what's green, on what's social, which is going to vary in India compared to Sri Lanka or compared to India, because they don't have the same rules in place. And then at the international level, you have exactly what you were saying. in terms of the rules of the IMF that sometimes have been put in place in different times and needs to be revised to be better fit with the current challenges.
Right. And this 1 trillion moonshot target that you talked about. So this target is to be achieved by SFH. Is that what you mean? That SFH will enable countries to raise this figure in sustainable investments by 2025?
Yeah. So the idea is that the SFH would contribute to the changes in this financial architecture that will enable this 1 trillion, but it's the SFH and all the partners. So the Sustainable Finance Hub is a hub. So we are collaborating with a lot of people and we count on everyone to support in achieving these targets.
Right. And as the Sustainable Finance Hub that you work at also has something called the SDG Integration Offer. And this is sort of a service offering to different nation states, I believe. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So on this offer, we are structuring it in different buckets. So it's called the 4+1. The 4 offers are actually tackling different parts of the financial system that needs to be strengthened and switched towards financing SDGs. So the first one is public finance. So based on the fact that official development assistance, which is a assistance that is provided to one country, is not enough to address the SDGs, then we want one country, for example, India, to have all the systems in place to be able to align its public finance towards the SDGs. That's the first one. And in that one, for example, we are acting on strengthening the tax revenues to align it to sustainable development goals. Then there is an offer for the private sector, because the money needed to finance the transition and sustainable development also needs to come from the private capital. And then we have an offer on what we call SDG impact management and finance tracking, which is more on the tools that you need to put in place to assess the impacts, and then country strategies. So it's called the Integrated National Financing Framework. So this framework, INFFs in the acronym, is a country-led approach that helps build a sustainable finance architecture at a country level. So it would provide guidance on resource allocation and barriers that you need at a country level to unlock private capital. And so we are working with countries to be able to put out their roadmaps and understand what parts of their roadmap needs to be financed by private sector, public sector, etc.
So I think, I think I'll come in here and thank you, Laure-Anne, for detailing the work that us at UNDP have been doing to ensure that sustainable finance gets scaled up. But just for our listeners, I'll take a step back here to define or to just talk about sustainable finance in the first place. And I think, in my opinion, the best way to define sustainable finance is to also talk about what sustainable finance is not, like what is it not limited to. So, for example, right now, sustainable finance is just not limited to having economic, social, or governance considerations, ESG considerations, while making financial decision making. And not just limiting yourself with that. Because if it happens, then what we will see is a market where investors will flock to the nations or to markets where companies are already aligned with ESG standards. And we'll see capital flying out of developing countries to European countries or countries in the West, where you already have companies who are aligned. Now, this has sort of two implications. One is one macro and micro. Macro being that if we indulge in this individually sensible action, where if we are asking the stakeholders to be risk averse on certain parameters, do heat stress testing of the asset, and just invest in particular markets or sectors, we'll see a flight of capital. And this will be particularly visible in in tropical or subtropical countries where changes of climate, the consequences of climate change are much more visible as of now, and who have the least capacity to address these. So, coming back to what Laure-Anne was saying, that all the details of what we are doing at SFH, be that regarding taxation, budget tagging, or just or just assisting in international cooperation, all of it is not just about ensuring that the investment flows to good places, but also ensuring that there's an overhaul of the system in itself. That uh, it's not about companies who are already aligned, but also about ensuring that sustainability is the guiding theorem, if I can say so, of the business upcoming or the existing business enterprises.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's, I believe, why the work you're doing is so interesting. Because you're not just approaching it in terms of raising finance, but rather redesigning architecture, like the word which Laure-Anne had mentioned earlier. Laure-Anne, I believe you have something to add.
Yes, I mean, thanks, Kamil, for this addition, and thank you. I think one of the very interesting initiatives we're working on is actually to be able to bring finance where it's needed. And coming back to what Kamil was saying, it's important that it's going to all the developing countries too. And there is this really amazing initiative, which is on investor maps, which is actually mapping where are the needs and where the money should flow, especially in these countries. And then it's about empowering countries, being private and public sector, to be able to harvest the benefits of it.
Right, and what also piqued my interest was the thing that you mentioned about public finance and influencing it in a way to sort of like bring in sustainability dimension to it. So I was wondering if you have any concrete examples that you could share with me as to how your work sort of benefited countries in bringing in those changes in their public finance architecture, maybe even related to taxation. Because for governments who are making budgets, I don't know if that's so much of a priority, right? They have more pressing concerns, they have elections to win and so on. So I'm sure like sustainability ranks way low on their priority scale. And as far as India is concerned, I know there are some incentives for, say, electric vehicles and all in our taxation policy. But other than that, we don't see much moving. Are there some examples that you could share with me with sort of speak of the work that you have done in redesigning taxation policies or any other aspect of public finance?
Yes, sure. So there is this huge initiative which is done in cooperation with OECD actually on tax, which is called Tax Inspectors Without Borders, which is redesigning the tax system so that taxation can be aligned to SDGs and countries we need this tax revenue to be able to actually also tackle their priorities and the basic needs, can raise the tax that they should raise. And this tax initiative for now, so it's been going since 2015, and it has supported the collection of $2 billion since then. So that's one initiative in terms of tax.
Right. So I also want to talk next about the work UNDP Sustainable Finance Hub did with regards to the recently concluded G20 meet in India. And before I get into the technical assistance action plan, which was agreed upon by the countries and so on, I want to know from you as to how your experience was. Both of you, Kamil, I believe you were closer home in New Delhi when the G20 was going on. So what was the experience like? How did the negotiations pan out? What was going on?
Yeah, surely. So last year for us at UNDP has been, or for me specifically, has been quite exciting because before I jump into explaining our role at G20, specifically Sustainable Finance Working Group, I want to just highlight the fact that UNDP has the secretariat for the Sustainable Finance Working Group of G20, and it is one of the only working group which has a secretariat. Now, what it means is that there is an institution or there's institution already in place which allows the incoming presidencies to get a go ahead. There is a body of knowledge. There are people who have worked on it before. So there are these civil servants, international civil servants, who are just ready to provide assistance at the go. So that was our role with India as well, while my colleagues, Laure-Anne, Marcos, and everyone at SFH were contributing. I was seconded to the Ministry of Finance, specifically Department of Economic Affairs, to assist the presidency with day-to-day affairs. Now, what do day-to-day affairs mean at G20? Okay, before I answer that, what do day-to-day affairs mean at G20, I would like to touch upon the fact or the or on the necessity of having sustainable finance working group. Why is this group so crucial in the first place? So I guess sustainable finance working group is part of the finance track, and the idea is that all the countries come together and decide on how they are going to move ahead on the policy issues regarding sustainable finance. How do we ensure that sustainable finance is taken up? And this was also the genesis of G20, right, in 90s, when we realized that in this globalized world, finance financial implications traverse borders, administrative borders, political borders. So there is need for more in international cooperation. This reflects more so in sustainable finance working group, because just to draw an analogy here, just like in globalized world, finance can easily, to an extent, flow across political borders. Emissions too, carbon emissions too, can flow quite freely, right? So an emissions from one country can have effect on another country. So this requires or provides for the necessity of countries coming together at a fora such as G20, major countries coming together and discussing, okay, how do you want to go forward? So this year, for India's presidency, certain priorities were identified, that namely 3 priorities. First was that how do we enhance climate finance? As I had mentioned before, the countries who are suffering the most due to climate change have the least capacity to deal with. Further, they are facing these challenges not for their own doing. Most of these emissions were emitted by other countries. So there's the first priority that that was put forward was on climate finance. How do countries come together and finance flows for the specific activities which go towards addressing climate change effects? Second was a very interesting or commendable priority taken up by Indian presidency, which expanded the scope. And I would say, in common parlance, like theoretically in academia, sustainable finance means many more things. But generally, when someone says sustainable finance, it was just limited to climate finance. So the second priority that presidency focus was on mainstreaming or pushing for including more issues under sustainable finance. So the idea was that how do we scale up sustainable finance for funding SDGs, social SDGs. And third was regarding capacity building, because everything said and done, if tomorrow, if a bank is asked that, hey, do not fund coal sector, or hey, you should fund this tech sector, then there are nuances to these financial management that financial industry as of now do not have, because just generally of how they have operated, the financial models that have been in place, the disclosure standards that are coming up. So it was realized that if we have to really ensure this transition, we need to build the capacity of financial stakeholders who are allowing the finance to flow to all the activities. And from this third priority, which was the need for capacity building, came the Technical Assistance Action Plan, which is also endorsed by the leaders in the New Delhi Leaders Declaration. So that way, having said that, now I'll just come to briefly say what the day-to-day negotiation, day-to-day work for me was like at the Ministry of Finance. So the work uh, was quite dynamic, and it could range from assisting presidency on any sort of input paper that is coming up, because to enable these discussions, there are so many uh, organizations who are producing body of knowledge who want to contribute to these discussions. How does this discussion get how does this knowledge get processed? And then this entire year is divided into four meetings. So before every meeting, you negotiate on certain topics. Certain topics are left for that meeting, because they require in-person negotiation, because the topics require more deliberation. And once the first meeting gets over, then you move on to the second step. First meeting was about finalizing agenda priorities. Once you have finalized your problems, then you go on to then talking about what are the recommendations, solutions. Then once you have done that, then third meeting would be about how do you go ahead and implement what the solution that we have discussed till now. So unlike in the common imagination of, let's say, Indian people, G20 is just not one grand meeting that happens at the end of year. It's a continuous negotiation process that's being undertaken by bureaucrats from all the member nations of G20 throughout the year. And through this and negotiation come out key consensus issues that get endorsed by political leaders in New Delhi Leaders Declaration.
Right. Yeah. Remarkable to know that insider's perspective, right? Laure-Anne, do you have something to add? How was your experience? Like you were away, of course, but you were coordinating the action which is going on here. So what are your learnings and what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not going to repeat what Kamil perfectly explained. Actually, I was not so away. I had the very absolute pleasure to serve also for a few months in the Ministry of Finance and learn from the team there. Huge cultural discovery on a personal side, and very interesting to actually dive deeper into how India is working on sustainable finance and everything which is going with it, and all the cultural history going on with it. Now, in terms of outcomes, I'm very pleased that we achieved a set of recommendations, as Kamil said, on different points, but especially on this technical assistance action plan, because there was this recognition that both public and private sector were in need of technical assistance, but lack of support or lack of ability to find what they were needed. So really happy that we could achieve an outcome and a concrete plan on this.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm very happy that you could visit and absorb all the cultural history and the food and so on. Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. So coming to the G20 Technical Assistance Action Plan, which was endorsed by the leaders of the G20, could you sort of set out what are the important actions and the stakeholders that have been identified in the action plan? And can you tell us what is the significance and what the nations will have to do now in order to put this plan into action?
Surely, I think I can take the lead here. Indian presidency realized that building capacity of financial stakeholders is paramount, and hence an action plan was developed. Now, this action plan has certain pillars around which it is developed. That is, one is acknowledging the fact that capacity building is required, that we need to give the participants of financial market the tools and knowledge for them to process the data that is coming out on sustainability issues, climate issues. And then second is that the tools that are coming out are not just tools or best practices that have been picked up from certain countries, from just select countries, but are tailored to the regional context in which they're going to be applied. And then third is about a very crucial element of sustainable finance policy making, that is called transition finance, which says that you can't just stop financing, say, fossil fuels from tomorrow. You need to transition from it, and to transition from it, you need to take into account certain factors. For example, let's say coal. Coal employs lakhs and crores of people. What happens tomorrow if you stop? You're talking about transitioning away from coal. What happens to that? There are socioeconomic repercussions to this. All of this was part of the transition finance framework that was developed during Indonesian presidency in 2022, and which fed into the Technical Assistance Action Plans. As I said, there are three pillars around it. One is acknowledging, getting the stakeholders together, ensuring that the solutions that you frame are regionally relevant, are in languages that people understand, and then specifically focusing on transition planning. So once this was, the TAAP was decided and endorsed by third meeting of SWG, UNDP was tasked as the convener to convene the mechanism for implementing TAAP. So right now we are in the process of coming up with this implementation mechanism. And just to give you a glimpse of it, what having a action plan is one thing, but what would it look like in implementation? So imagine TAAP as the convener of conveners. So the certain problems that were identified. So during Indian presidency, SFWG did a stock taking exercise of all the capacity building providers, the kind of problems people are facing. Why are capacity building providers not able to build capacity of all the financial stakeholders? So there are certain problems regarding funding, accessibility, fragmentation within the market of not the market, but the providers of capacity building were identified. So it was decided that there's a need to convene the conveners. Like, there are regional hubs doing capacity building, but there's a need to get everyone on board. As I said, international cooperation is so crucial for an area like sustainable finance. So imagine TAAP being a neutral platform for addressing the capacity building challenges or the barriers to scale up sustainable finance. And by enhancing coordination among various stakeholders, you meet the skill and funding needs of the sector. Now, this is just explanation of it. Let me give you an example how it could pan out. For example, so many stakeholders for TAAP. Let's take Government of India being one of the stakeholders. Now, the Government of India proposes that there's going to be a solar energy project that's going to come up, that's going to align with India's renewable energy goals. So now, where could TAAP come in? So it will allow government to readily tap into prevailing body of knowledge, get policy guidance, connect it with technical assistance providers, which are favorable or which cater to the needs of this sustainable energy investment. So this would be just one aspect of it. Now, there will be, as and when this policy plays out, there will be multiple stakeholders that's going to come into the picture. For example, local banks and financial institutions. And over here, the role could be about allowing financial institutions, providing them with technical assistance to fund them, or allowing them to build the financial products that are required for the project. And I think we'll soon come to the novelty of these financial instruments that are there in sustainable finance, because the financial instruments that are there till now are not the one that will allow us to meet the goals. So there is this requirement or this need for ingenuity in developing specific financial instruments. So TAAP is going to be this coordination hub of identifying the problems that implementers or stakeholders are facing, and then connecting them with the necessary knowledge, and then once that knowledge has been connected, seeing that the knowledge being transferred is, as it's been said in TAAP, it's relevant, it's accessible in the language. So I can give you more example, but I think I'll let you let Laure-Anne come in, or if you have any questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is quite interesting, and I was wondering, what does the TAP have for the private players? Because the states, of course, have a very important role to play, but a lot of this financing and refinancing needs will be met through capital markets, financial markets, where private sectors play a major role. And also, of course, if you want to make sustainable finance sort of successful, then there is a need to give a serious push towards making private players an integral part of this game. So I was just wondering, what is the technical assistant action plan, or does it at all talk about the private sector within the G20 countries, and what does it have in store for these actors?
Surely, private sector, as we have discussed, is very integral to this change towards a sustainable financial system. The way we are envisioning TAP right now would be that there is a steering committee or committee of representatives where we will have representatives from governments, regulators, academia, private sector. And this gathering will allow deliberation among all these representatives for the private sector to raise their concerns, their needs, and for other stakeholders to come in and to sort of provide for these things. I think Laure-Anne has something to say there.
Yeah, just adding to what you were saying, in the Technical Assistance Action Plan, there are specific recommendations for the private sector, and especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are very, very important actors, especially in some developing countries. And I think India has a huge SME community. And so it's important to support them to actively be able to identify, understand, manage sustainable related risk, and also to be able to comply with the potential new requirements that are going to come in terms of what you need to put in place to be sustainable, all the reporting pieces and data collection that they're going to need to work on. So there is definitely a piece on that, helping so SMEs for sure, larger company also, but helping them to transition and to become more sustainable.
Yeah, and I can think of a very practical need, right? So Indian stock market regulator recently mandated that the top 250 or 500 companies by market cap will have to make mandatory ESG disclosures, and section of them will also have to make ESG related disclosures relating to the value chain suppliers, right? I mean, for a country like India, where the value chains are spread across the vastness of the country, and the SME sector, which may be one of the participants, may not have the necessary equipment or the wherewithal to sort of have that data in place and make those disclosures in a timely manner. And I believe something of technical assistance that you speak of will be very much helpful for these kind of players going ahead. And I sort of want to take this conversation forward into, talking a little bit more about India and what are your thoughts on the policy priorities that India should make. And I want to come to you, Laure-Anne, first, and then Kamil. And I want to know from you as to, what should be the national priorities in terms of policy reforms. Of course, you've talked about this at an abstract level, at the level of financial architecture and so on. But if you had to make some strong, concrete recommendations for a large developing middle income country like India, what would those be?
Sure, I can start. First, I think we need to recognize the huge work that has already happened in India. You were exactly mentioning the disclosure requirements coming in. There is also the government who has been able to issue green bonds, so green instruments. Also in terms of budget tagging, green growth has been identified as a priority. So India is already doing a lot, and it's going into a good direction. Now, for sure, there is always things to do, and it's possible to go faster. So India still has like a few trillions needed to transition, especially in terms of energy, vehicles, etc. So one thing that has been identified, we were talking about it, is capacity building. One of the main and huge challenges to come for India is about jobs and the transition in having more like green jobs and jobs that also are qualitative, so decent working inclusion condition. One really important thing that the G20 put on the table this year was to include this social piece into the discussion of sustainability. And so in there, there is a huge opportunity to explore what would be the role of the financial system to actually support this transition of jobs, and what role the financial system can play in this expansion, and especially about the small and medium-sized enterprises, that we were mentioning before. So that's one. Then I think India also have a huge technology industry, and this can be a very good value add to work on how to support decarbonization, how to measure, how to track, and also how to move forward and include the digital piece into the financial reforms. So that's two of them. I don't know, maybe Kamil, if you want to go on, or I can propose another one or two.
Yeah, please go ahead. No, Laure-Anne, I think you had a couple more reforms to suggest. So.
Okay, sure. So one other. So now, if you go more into the tools themselves, so I was hinting on this social piece. So actually, the financial system has worked a lot on the green side, but there was some research showing that only 5% of the finance sector initiative had a focus on SDGs. So there is a big challenge in supporting companies actually to really embed the social factors into their decision-making processes. And for that, you have a few international initiatives working on that. But that would be a work that would be needed primarily in the private sector, but also in the public sector. And then you have one really interesting recommendation from actually Nick Robbins, which is a professor of sustainable finance at LSE, who was hinting to the fact that, also linked to this social agenda, one thing that IKEA could do is to push and publish the taxonomy that has been drafted or starting working with, so that there is a clear definition on what is green, what is just. And one of the really interesting things about India taxonomy is that it includes a piece on social and incorporates social, which lots of taxonomies are not doing. So that would be interesting also to push forward.
So, Kamil, according to you, what should be like India's priorities when it comes to some immediate or short to medium term policy reforms, which can sort of take us forward in this direction towards sustainable finance?
So, Laure-Anne has rightly highlighted the trajectory of India, that India has always been at the forefront of the discussions around clean energy, sustainability, and which also reflects from its pledges to renewable energy and also its execution of the plan. India's policy reform started in 2007 when regulators started testing the waters with coming up with voluntary disclosure norms, where companies were required to assess their impact on various sustainability indicators. And slowly, India has moved towards mandatory disclosures from voluntary, which is also the right thing to do. First, you test the waters and then you train the stakeholders rather than just this being a knee-jerk reaction. I think India has made a calculated bet and a calculated strategy for reforming towards a sustainable financial system. And as you said, the recent big thing happening in India is SEBI's BRSR, uh, which stand for Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting requirements, and they require the top 1,000 listed companies to make certain disclosures. So, having said that, India has come so far. Things that India could look at, or not just India, let's say uh, any developing country or country which want to put in a framework for scaling up sustainable finance, there are certain pillars such as uh, taxonomy, disclosure requirements, capacity building. And as I said, as Laure-Anne has already mentioned, India is already working on all these things. So, and as was reflected in India's successful presidency, that it is keen on moving towards a sustainable future, or a sustainable or a financial market which fuels sustainable enterprises.
Right. The last thing I want to talk about in this conversation with both of you is regarding financial innovation, right? In this sustainability space, recently we have seen green bonds being issued by corporates, and we've also had the Indian government issue sovereign green bonds, which was by and large a huge success. So there are a lot of innovations which are coming up. I think Kamil alluded to the need of novelty in sustainable financing as we go ahead, right? And I think what Laure-Anne talked about, having a taxonomy in place, is also extremely important, so that some concerns around greenwashing and so on can be addressed. But just on the space of financial products, right? So I want to know your thoughts from both of you as to how has this shaped over the last decade. What are some of those financial innovations that you would like to mention, and how does it look as far as innovation is concerned in the coming decade or so?
Surely, this is a very interesting topic. As I had said before, we need financial ingenuity. The financial instruments are not well suited to transform our economy towards a sustainable economy. Similarly, the financial instruments that we are looking at need to adjust the return expectations of returns for investors. What is the risk appetite? And when we talk about these things, certain instruments or theories come into discussion, such as blended finance, de-risking, guarantees. But I won't go into the technical aspect of it. I think I'll just give one example of bond, which was aimed towards conservation of wildlife, and how this was one of its own novel approach towards a financial instrument aimed towards conserving nature. So this was a bond issued by World Bank called Rhino Bond, and how it operated was that World Bank floated the bonds to investors. The bonds were around $150 million. Investors who bought the bonds did not get the coupon payments that you get generally in bonds. Instead, they were told that we will use your money in conservation activities in the national parks of South Africa for conserving the population of rhinos, who play a very critical role in the ecosystem of the national parks there. And their what do you call it? The payment was contingent upon the success of the conservation efforts. For example, $150 million went into, say, conserving efforts for, say, 100 rhinos. Now, tomorrow, after 5 years, if 100 rhinos became 110 or 120 or 150, investors will be paid according to the results of this conservation effort. Now, there are certain things that come to our mind. There are certain things about it that investors would be paid their principal back regardless of the numbers of rhinos in the park. For example, if we start with 100, if they become 110, investors will get let's say coupon amount of $10 million on top of 150. But if it goes down to 90 or 80 or 70, investors still will still get 150 back. And this 150 will come from Global Environment Facility, GEF. So what you're seeing over here is this multiple stakeholders coming in, World Bank creating this financial instrument to crowd in private sector. If private sector deems it fit that this is an issue worth investing in, they will invest. If the conservation efforts bring you result, investors will be paid back, let's say interest payment on top of the bond by the Global Environment Facility. So this is the kind of ingenuity I'm talking about.
So the same question to you, Laure-Anne, plus a small follow-up as well as to, Kamil spoke about the innovations happening in the bond market. I would also like to hear from you, is something happening in the equity side of things? Are there innovations taking place there? Are there new financial instruments that are being launched and talked about?
Sure. So exactly, as Kamil said, there is a huge innovation that has been taking place for the past decades in the bond market, mainly putting the bonds more green, more sustainable, but it's not the only place where things are changing and moving. So in general, there is this tendency of greening or making more social existing financial instruments, and the bonds are one of these examples. Then there is another trend of harvesting new technologies, such as blockchain or tokenization, to actually create new financial instruments and making them better for the Sustainable Development Goals. So, for example, blockchain can help enhance transparency and traceability in supply chain, etc. So, and can also enable to build new sustainable finance instruments. So I feel in that space there is still a lot to be done. Now, in terms of the equity markets, you do have some innovations, especially on the impact side, so on the private equity market, where there is an increasing number of funds trying to target an impact in addition to a financial return. So it's going with a change in the way financial actor operates. Now you also have on the public market side all the exchange trading funds and indexes, so the ETFs that are aligned on SDG targets and that allow passive investors to invest in sustainability even if they themselves are not able or don't have time to analyze specifically each and every of their investments.
Right. Yeah. I think the Indian regulator is also planning to allow the launch of ESG mutual funds, or I think some of them have already hit the market. So this is definitely an exciting space to watch out for. Anyway, a very good conversation with both of you on all things policy today. Very happy to learn about the work you do. And I believe the work that you guys are doing is not over yet. I think it carries on from G20 to G20. Now I think you have a lot more to be done over the course of Brazil's G20 presidency. So good luck to both of you in that regard. So thank you, Laure-Anne. Thank you, Kamil, for appearing on All Things Policy and joining me in this chat today.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you for having us. It's great.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.